Good morning, good evening, wherever you are. And welcome to the Global Technology Summit by Carnegie Endowment. We have what I call a mind-broadening session today. Just the world that we're talking about, the world that we live in. And how do we navigate today's world? To talk about this, and the world as we see today is A, more polarized, B, more fractious, if I may, because the old systems that we had set up no longer work. There are a host of new powers on the horizon. Not all of them are state powers. Many are tech powers. Technology itself, it has become big enough to be a state of its own. Cryptocurrency that we look at today can move markets, can move governments, and has a personality of its own. So what is it that the new world looks like, and how is it that we negotiate or navigate this world with each other or by ourselves? To debate this today, we have a stellar panel, Jim Balsillie, Andrew McCosh, and Ashok Malik. May I start with Jim, with you? And if you could give us your thoughts on the world that we see around us. How do you see this world through, if not a crystal ball, but through whichever instrument, tech instrument you want to use today? So Jim, over to you.
Pleasure. And first, congratulations to the Carnegie India team for your continued success with the summit. And thank you for inviting me to participate today, along with my esteemed panelists. As a tech entrepreneur and advocate for improved public policy for the 21st century economy, I'll comment on the impacts of the digital era and what I think is necessary to secure our technological future in line with democratic values and interests. 40 years ago, the traditional production-based economy began transitioning to a knowledge-based economy, and more recently to a data-driven economy. The shift transformed the world previously based on open science, liberalized trade through tariff reductions, and a patent system designed to reward genuine inventions into a world of closed science, closed markets, and monopolization of knowledge and information. Knowledge-based and data-driven economies didn't just signal detachment from physical production. They foundationally changed the structure and behavioral characteristics of companies, which became capital equipment light and worker lean, yet operating at global scale, pulling in massive profits and paying little taxes. These companies turned to aggressively generating intellectual property assets, and in the last decade to controlling data assets as tools to allow them to control markets and capture superior economic rents, often with increasing marginal returns. The transformation of the economy into a knowledge-based and data-driven model has reshaped the international competitive landscape. In advanced countries, policymakers turn to upgrading their traditional economic policy toolkits with designs for new marketplace frameworks that reward owners of IP, including through standard setting, the critical frontier where IP rights owners fight for dominance in value chains. IP and data are now the world's most valuable business assets, comprising over 91% of the S&P 500's $28 trillion total value, up from 17% in the 1970s. This constitutes an unprecedented economic transformation in both degree and rapidity, and it is clear this pace of transformation will continue at an increasing rate. Today, US-based companies own half of the world's most valuable IP and control vast amounts of data flowing through networks of the digital economy, evidenced by the $10 trillion combined market value of Apple, Amazon, Alphabet, Facebook, and Microsoft, with tangible assets comprising only 4% of their assets. Countries such as South Korea, Germany, Singapore, Israel, Sweden, Taiwan, and Japan formulated equally sophisticated strategies attuned to their domestic realities and followed the US example. But no country has made as concerted and comprehensive an effort to raise the level of its game in the IP and data intensive economy as China, including their recently published, and I quote, Guidelines for Building a Powerful Country with IP Rights, 2021 to 2035, a report that lays out in startling detail of the sophistication of Chinese policymakers in using national IP assets, and I quote, as a core element of international competitiveness. The shift to the digital era has also prompted many economies to retool and recalibrate their prosperity strategies to fit the shift from the traditional economy to the economy of intangibles. In the modern economy, spillovers from foreign investment don't yield the same positive spillovers to the host economy the same way they used to, requiring a revisiting of acceptable foreign investment models to protect companies and critical technologies and allow for the wealth and security effects to benefit host economies. In the tangible economy, virtually all foreign investments, direct or portfolio, result in positive economic spillovers. However, in the intangible economy, FDI takes the form of a business in one country possessing controlling ownership of what is commonly known as a foreign branch plant in another, far too often manifesting as a negative spillover. The effects of intangible assets are dual use, spilling over into non-economic realms of public good, such as security, society, and democracy. Data capital stocks create new issues regarding ownership of data and national regulations for the data-driven economy. It makes those who control the data permanently wealthy and powerful by employing strategies consisting of rules, regulations, and international agreements that embed their norms, advantage their economies, and advance their broader geostrategic interests. Additionally, surveillance capitalism is reshaping markets while threatening to unravel liberal democracy. It leaves a trail of wreckage in its wake, the wholesale destruction of privacy, the intensification of social inequality, the creation of a mental health crisis amongst youth, the poisoning of social discourse with misinformation, the demolition of social norms, and the weakening of democratic institutions. In 2018, I spoke at the IMF and called for a Bretton Woods moment where we need new or reformed rules of the road for a digitally mediated global commerce, a WTO 2.0. I was pleased to see progress in this regard with 43 member states signing on to an international partnership on information and democracy at the UN meetings in September, which included Canada, India, and UK as signatories. I hope these opening comments provide helpful seeds for the discussion on the digital transformation ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. You have opened the way for a number of questions, and I hope you are ready with the answers. Ashok, may I call on you now to give us a sense of how multilateralism or how the multilateral world looks like in today's context, with all the challenges and the opportunities that technological advances have brought.
Thank you, Indrani, and like Jim, I'd like to thank Carnegie India for inviting me to speak at this event. It's an absolute pleasure for the Ministry of External Affairs, where I work, to partner Carnegie in hosting the 6th iteration of the Global Technology Summit. When this summit was inaugurated by Carnegie India with support from the MEA 6 years ago, to traditional foreign policy and strategic affairs practitioners, at least in India, it was an idea that was perhaps ahead of its time, and there were sort of quizzical looks as to, is the world ready for a full-fledged foreign policy conference, which is based on the theme of technology. The biggest change we've seen is that 6 years down the line, nobody's asking that question. It's taken for granted that technology will both drive foreign policy and in turn be driven by it. I'd like to base my opening remarks on on a combination of 3 and 6, 3 and 5 actually. The three big issues of our time that, to my mind, all have technology implications. One is the pandemic and recovery from the pandemic in the broader sense of the term, not just health recovery, but the broader economic recovery. The second is climate change, and especially after COP26, how we move forward to mitigate and combat climate change. And the third is the very complicated geopolitical situation we find ourselves in, with the pre-COVID trend lines being sharpened and accentuated by the pandemic. In a nutshell, this is going to lead to more China, less America, more multipolarity, less multilateralism. All three of these trends, pandemic, climate change, and this complicated geopolitical map before us, all three have technology implications, and technology is a cross-cutting feature. To my mind, there are 5 big trends before us. One, at least for the next 10 years, that is. One, health is emerging as an instrument of international politics in a way it has not since, God knows, since perhaps the Black Death. Vaccines, diagnostics, personalized medicine, attention on hitherto neglected diseases, on new emerging diseases, and on combating or anticipating the next pandemic, because we know we will have one. All of these are going to become very important for not just boffins or think tank academics, but for foreign policy practitioners. Technology is going to play a very big role in all of these, and diplomats and foreign policy practitioners are going to have to look at technology and technology choices much more carefully. Second, and here I'm quoting the integrated review by the UK government a few months ago, science and technology are emerging as a very important metric of national power. We've seen this even during the pandemic when vaccine innovation and digital technology became very important to national pandemic responses. In India, it helped us get financial benefits and money to 400 million people who received money because of this triangulation of biometric identities, mobile phones, and bank accounts for the hitherto unbanked. It also led to a technology-based monitoring and seamless transfer of food rations to a very large population, hundreds of millions of people, by some accounts, 800 million people. All of this was accelerated and enabled by technology. And technology emerged as a very important enabler of not just the pandemic response, but of developmental goals. Climate change mitigation and the energy transition is the next big frontier. Here again, technology is going to be the key to how quickly countries such as India or many other countries to achieve their goals. The third trend line I see is resilience and diversification of global supply chains, where people are moving from, as someone put it, from just in time to just in case. They are going to build redundancies, they're going to build options, they're going to diversify. We are seeing all this in the context of physical goods, but all of this also has an implication for technology and for technology supply chains. Resilience and diversification of technology supply chains is an emergent issue before us. Fourth, we were already seeing before the pandemic, but we're seeing it even more so now. There is greater realism on trade, on multilateralism, and on external dependencies. Again, this is going to influence and is already beginning to influence thinking and policy choices in the technology domain. Simply put, there's going to be a greater focus and a greater prioritization in terms of national capacities and trusted partnerships. And this is where standard setting, which Jim referred to, also comes in, because you will move towards standards that suit you or suit your trusted partners. Finally, technology flows, at least for our lifetimes or our parents' lifetimes, have followed a north-south direction. They've flowed from the north to the south. Today, they are much more multi-directional. They crisscross, it's almost a Brownian motion. Companies will compete. Companies from the global south and the global north will compete. Indian companies will compete for market share in technology innovation and even more so in technology and digital application, for instance. And we're already seeing some of this. It's a more equal world. It's a more gritty world. This will enhance competition even between partners who will otherwise work together. And of course, climate change innovation will lead to hopefully even more competition and even better and more affordable and equitable solutions. I'd like to stop there. That's the big picture as I see it, and happy to get into a discussion.
Thank you, Ashok. Andrew, may I call on you? The UK is, in a way, in a new world. In a post-Brexit world, and you are rewriting your relationship with the world. And how are you doing that? And what does this new world look like to you?
Indrani, thank you so much. And first, like Ashok and Jim, I'd just like to thank the Carnegie Foundation India for hosting such a great summit. And thank you and the Indian External Ministry for the really warm welcome you've extended to the UK throughout this summit. It feels extremely important that you're holding it, and extremely important that we're here. And I'm delighted to be representing my country in this panel. And just very briefly introduce myself. I'm Andrew McCosh. I'm a career diplomat, and I've recently become simultaneously both the Deputy National Technology Advisor in the UK and the Deputy National Security Advisor with responsibility for science and technology. And why is that important? And what will my opening remarks be about? I think it's important because Jim set out, if you like, a lot about the economic benefits, opportunities, and the economic risks and social risks that follow from this world, which is changing at such enormously rapid pace with respect to science and technology. Science and technology is the defining feature of our age. It's changing what it means to be human. It's changing what it means to be a country. It's changing what it means to be a government, a state, an individual. And we need to think about all of the economic and social aspects alongside its impact on geopolitics and our national security, which Ashok very brilliantly turned on then. So I thought probably I wouldn't repeat what they've said, that it'd be very difficult to do justice to what they've said, and rather seek to address how the UK is looking at this whole issue in the hope that both we can seek advice back from this panel, but it'll be food for thought. So globally, the UK is seeing the impact of science and technology on everything. Science and technology is undeniably a force for good. When we look at this tragic epidemic that's raged around the world, and we look at the power of science and technology to mitigate the risks, not just in the vaccine, which is an extraordinary science and technology story, and an extraordinary story of international partnership, not least between India and the UK, but also in therapeutics and very rapid knowledge, and in genomics, very rapid knowledge of what the virus was, how to treat it, how to mitigate its worst impacts. And we should be proud collectively of harnessing science and technology to that. We can see it's connecting people globally. It's creating new value in economies all over the world. It's creating the opportunity for new business models. It's offering the promise of breakthroughs in our management of climate, in our generation of new materials, new agriculture, a whole bunch of stuff. I think we all see that. We don't need to repeat it. And with it, I think we're all deeply aware that it comes with great risks of building bias, of cementing power in new places, and in being encoded globally in ways that don't support the values that have kept our free societies strong, powerful, and influential. And the UK addressed all of that in its integrated review, which Ashok talked to. But the review is just a start point. It's a statement of a vision for the UK. And what I've been working on with many colleagues over the last few months is trying to turn aspects of that into reality. And the UK has decided that it wishes to be a science superpower. And what it really means is it wants to harness effectively the potential of science and technology to the well-being of our citizens, to gain an edge in respect to our climate resilience, to gain an edge for our citizens with respect to prosperity, to gain an edge in the health outcomes our citizens can expect, to gain an edge over our adversaries, whether in cyberspace or in real space, and to gain an edge in the global battle for influence. And that battle broadly is between societies where the individual, free enterprise, democracy, pluralism are enabled by technology, or societies that somehow become constrained by a technology-driven dictatorship as a service. All of those things we've taken into the mix, and what we've done is we have set up some new architecture to approach that. And we've done some things which Britain's never done before. So the Prime Minister, for the first time in Britain, has created a National Science and Technology Council at cabinet level under his chairmanship to be the analogy, to be the partner, the peer of our National Security Council. For the first time, we've appointed a National Technology Advisor to be the CTO for the country, in effect, to help advise the government on its strategic science and technology choices, how to harness science and technology to the national good. And the office I'm running, which is a sort of strategic brain at the heart of Cabinet Office, is designed to support the National Technology Advisor and enable that new National Science and Technology Council to make excellent decisions on science and technology in a national interest. And that council is interesting because for the first time, what it does is it brings together our big national security departments, our defense department, our home affairs department, our intelligence agencies, along with our international trade departments and our foreign office, and our big domestic spending departments, those who are delivering goods and services to our people every day on transport, in education, in health. And it's saying, we need to take decisions with respect to science and technology in a holistic, consistent, cross-government manner, which is transparent to business, transparent to academia. We need collectively to set out our ambitions for what science and technology can do for the country in health, in climate, in national security, on digital potential for all. And that's really what we're forming up now and what I'm working on. Now, it's really, really important to us to note that there's a danger that could be misconstrued as fundamentally a protectionist and nationalist position. It isn't. The thing we really, really want to drive is for these excellent outcomes to be global, for excellent health outcomes to be spread globally, for the values of democracy, free enterprise, pluralism, rule of law to be spread globally, for excellent climate outcomes to be spread globally, for cybersecurity, physical security to be spread globally. And so we see this not as a pure national pursuit, but as a pursuit we wish to do in concert with like-minded countries, where we're all thinking holistically about our science system, the ecosystems required to enable them with respect to skills, education, talent flows, data flows, trusted capital flows, all these things, and then partner with like-minded countries to form an alliance for the common good with respect to science and technology. So my final point would really be to say, we're really keen on partnership with like-minded countries. We want to work together with the free world to create a world where science and technology works for individual citizens, reinforces their freedoms, reinforces their potential, improves their health, improves their ability to cope with climate, and avoid some of the risks that could manifest as a rather more dystopian future that I think we all fear, where science and technology basically cements autocracy, cements surveillance systems, and constrains human potential.
Thank you, Andrew, for that. I have a question, though. It seems to me that there's a thin line, as you spoke about countries which use technology for surveillance, for a dictatorship, countries that use technology as an enabler. The point is that line which crosses from protectionism to a global or a globalized system, comes up against some of these barriers. Now, how do you navigate between the two, between being protectionist, choosing your friends or choosing trusted allies, as well as protecting nations, systems, etc., from the other side?
I can give you a stab at that, Indrani. It's a great question. It's probably the question. Of course, we all want, particularly our commercial sectors, to thrive. We all want economic benefit to flow to our systems. I suspect the answer really is in Ashok's concept of Brownian motion, which is there's a huge amount of value going to be created globally through R&D and commercialization of new technology. And it's not anymore being created in a sort of classic north-south way. It's being created all over the place. And what we need to do is work together to create ecosystems of mutual value. And I think we need to choose our partners, all of us, carefully there. We want to work with like-minded countries and then think about what that means for where we let data from our individuals' countries flow to, what it means for our international partnerships in R&D, what it means for our international partnerships with respect to trade and capital flows. And I think the answer is none of us will benefit from protectionism. All of us stand to benefit, both in terms of kind of health, climate, national security outcomes, from a broad alliance of democracies to harness science and technology to human good. Now, there's complexity within that there always is in kind of trade and commerce. But I think we feel that the answer lies in that Brownian notion point, that there is no single pole where all the power sits in here, and there's mutual advantage to be wrought with care through a web of alliances that knit our countries together.
Thank you. And Ashok, I mean, if I can continue this conversation with you. Andrew spoke about commercialization of technology, and how do you see the relationship, or rather the growing relationship with the tensions and the collaborations between, say, big tech? And we have been seeing this in the last few weeks, months, between big tech and a country like India and a system like India. How do you see that?
I think you're referring to the new rules we have vis-a-vis social media. Yes. Frankly, we are not the only ones struggling with dealing with the implications of social media. Look, many of the implications and benefits of social media are absolutely welcome as instruments of communication, as enablers of communication, and of greater democratic conversations, deeper democratic conversations. It's changed our world forever, and that's wonderful. But there are spillovers, unfortunate spillovers from our computers and our mobile phones onto the physical world and onto our streets in terms of hate speech on, let's say, Twitter or Facebook, causing violence or rumors or, violence online, translating into violence offline. We are not the only country concerned about that. The UK is concerned, Australia is concerned, France is concerned, the US is concerned. We're all trying to cope with it and trying to find answers in our own way. No one's getting it completely right. And rather than talking past each other, we should be collaborating and trying to find a common minimum way without, of course, in any way obstructing free speech. Nobody wants that. No democracy, at least, wants that. Big tech has to be a partner in this. Big tech cannot see itself as different from, the rest of the world, the physical world, and from sovereign requirements and sovereign situations in different countries and different geographies. To some degree, big tech has operated in a free zone because governments have taken time to understand the implications of this new technology and have woken up to potential risk against, of course, many, many benefits. They've woken up to these potential risks only recently. And only big tech has to see itself as a partner and has to see itself as a solution provider, not as either what I call a P6 the sixth permanent member of the UN, which operates completely independently and has a veto over all of us, or as a perennial victim of big bad government, because that's not helpful. Let me give you one example of what I mean. We've had this constant battle with Twitter, and I'm only using Twitter here as an example. I have nothing against Twitter. I've been on Twitter for many years and I love Twitter. It's even headed by an Indian now. But we've had this battle with Twitter in terms of if an Indian citizen living in India or the Indian government has a problem with content on Twitter, how does he, she, or it complain? And this is what Twitter India told all of us in a court of law in Bangalore. Twitter India said, we are a marketing company. Content is managed by Twitter Incorporated based in California. So the judge asked, does that mean Twitter Incorporated in California is your parent company? So Twitter India said, no, it's not our parent company. Our parent company is, we are co-owned by Twitter Ireland and Twitter the Netherlands. So our dividends and our profits are repatriated to Ireland and the Netherlands. So the judge then asked, so are Twitter Ireland and Twitter Netherlands responsible for the content that should be complained to them if you have a problem with content? Twitter India said, no, you can't complain to them. Content is managed by Twitter US. So do we complain to Twitter US? No, they're not our parent company. Now, this sort of a jurisdiction, jurisdiction shopping, as it were, is going to exasperate governments. It's going to exasperate Andrew's government and my government and all of us. And it's not helpful. We have to find a solution. And Twitter and social media and big tech are part of the solution. But this conversation cannot happen if one partner feels there's no need for this conversation.
Thank you. Thank you, Ashok. Jim, if I could continue this with you, what is a technological solution? Where does the world draw the line, or where do we all draw the line between what a government that is structured in a more traditional way, government ideas, government laws, structured for a different era, meets big technology or the kind of globalized technology that we see today? Where is the technological fix?
Well, thank you for the question, and I'm admiring what Andrew and Ashok have to say. I come at this from a unique perspective. As an entrepreneur, I grew BlackBerry from an idea to 20 billion sales. But in parallel, I did business with these companies from their very beginning, but I also participate in these forums and am a funder of public policy, and I'm a voracious reader. And I will say, in my reading, I will say that I find the work of the civil service in the UK the best I've come across in the world. I think there's something incredibly strong and high quality in their House of Lords reports and all of that. And I learn a lot from that. I think from the Indian government, I learn a lot that they take national approaches. And I'm going to explain this here. Fundamentally, the world has changed in that Ricardian comparative advantage was the system of liberalization with the Bretton Woods systems post-World War II, have a near equilibrium state through comparative advantage trading economies. When you go to an intangibles economy, it goes to absolute advantage where a state or a company can be absolute advantage on every realm. So it's not a cooperative system. And so there's no equilibrium state. And then when you blend it over into social well-being of democracy and mental health, then it has an incredible splash into public goods. And then you go into elements of geostrategic, it then goes there. So it's a wicked problem in that it's cross-cutting nature. And so I think, we need reformed rules for the road. When Ashok was talking about social media, the fundamental problem, I think we'll look back in 20 years with horror at what we allowed social media to do today, because it's fundamentally focused on undermining human autonomy, which is a basic human right. And it's supposed to be protected by UN conventions. And so we keep trying to deal with these ex post with redistribution and taking down harms rather than ex ante by the design of the system and its incentives. And fundamentally, this means the system embeds norms, which means there's not going to be global agreement. So, it's a wicked problem. I think the most important thing is to frame the problem correctly. It's not a cooperative system. There are no friends when it's absolute advantage. And the only reason you invest in cooperation is so that you can get your fair share of the advantaging of the system. But the problem is it's all driven by marketplace frameworks, which are prone to gaming because they change hundreds of times a day. Whereas just taking down tariffs and national treatment's a fairly steady state. So yeah, it's going to be, I think the world is going to get bumpier before it gets easier. I think it's all about upping game. I think it is about finding like-minded partnerships, which both Andrew and Ashok talked about, where you begin by sharing values because it nests values. Whereas the WTO and the tariff system, it really wasn't about values. It's just about efficiency. So it's a wickedly complex problem. I think for this panelist, India, UK, and Canada have a lot more in common than disagreement in sort of the realms to cooperate. So those are beginning points. But I think the most important part of this, and I'll wrap up at this, is you have to formulate the core aspects of the problem and the nature of the issue up front. And the conventional framing does not apply anymore.
Thank you, Jim. If I may stretch this a little more, which is, how, in your view, would you define the nature of power in a world where traditional governments, the Westphalian state, a multilateral order that is 70 years old, meets technological advancements that completely upend everything else that we have known? So where, in your view, what is the nature of power? How do we define power? You said we have to define values, but you also have to define power. And how do you define power in this?
Well, you have absolutely asked the right question. And it's funny because I won't tell the tale at school, but we did have a Carnegie board meeting and I brought up this question, which is, you're not defining power. And fundamentally, the locus of power has shifted and how it's exercised and who has it. And fundamentally, many of these actors are trying to devolve power away from the state. And so that's why I called for reformed institutions. Like, they created the Financial Stability Board after the financial crisis because they said we need rules and standards because this thing's run amok. And if we don't cooperate, it'll overrun us. Now, everyone was invested in stability. And so the issue is, you're absolutely right. The state have to reseize power on behalf of the citizen. These structures are anti-democratic. They're anti-human flourishing. They're tyrannical. And yet the nature of the structures, not all states believe in human flourishing in the same fashion. We obviously share liberal democracy. So you have to begin with values, and then you go at how does power get exercised and how does it get tamed, so that, because I'm a capitalist and I believe in technology, but you're supposed to generate human flourishing and private gain concurrently. It shouldn't be an appropriation of human flourishing for private gain. And I think the system is way too tilted to the appropriation game, not the generation game. So yeah, you need to come at institutions for capacity building first and foremost, because they they work cross department and cross nation state. So they fracture the normal response mechanisms, yet they themselves are very coordinated. So the answer is an organizing principle for capacity building to counter the formidable power that they exercise through lobbying, regulatory capture, gaslighting, buying other forms of think tank interests, academies, and so on. Very, very sophisticated regulatory capture. And so their game is not innovation anymore. It's much more regulatory capture.
Thank you. I see, Ashok, you have a hand up. Do jump in.
You know, the key point to add to what Jim says, or to sort of take up from what he says, and I'm completely in agreement with him that you have a situation where technology innovation is taking place at a faster pace than ever before in history. We know that. You also have technology being developed, innovations taking place broadly in the private sector, despite the admirable phrase Jim had for civil service and bureaucracy. Frankly, the civil service and bureaucracy does not develop technology, the private sector does, which is wonderful, of course. But when the private sector starts, in a sense, managing and delivering public goods, it gets a sort of semi-government, close to government role or responsibility. It's not quite government, but it has a responsibility beyond just profit maximization and beyond just, you know, chasing revenue and eyeballs or sales targets. Let me give you a very simple everyday example. There was a time in maybe our parents' generation when a standstill in the transport system of a city meant the publicly owned bus system going on strike. Today, it could mean a disruption caused by Uber or Ola in India or somebody similar, which is beyond the government's control, beyond the city government's control, beyond the national government's control. Increasingly, public goods and services, it could be data, it could be internet connectivity, it could be transport, are going to be managed by big technology companies. There's an Indian technology company which bought it's a big technology company in Chile. It thought it was going to own a big IT company, and that's it. It soon realized it was also managing Santiago's transport network. So it has a public role and responsibility. This means it has to adopt some of the norms and values that come with governance. And that really is the key. It can't, big tech or technology companies can't just see themselves as individual corporations in the traditional sense. They do have a broader public and governance responsibility. So you asked about the nature of power, it's much more diffused, but so is the nature of responsibility.
Thank you. Andrew, you do need to step in here, and then I have a question for you.
I'll be brief, because these are very, very big questions. The first point is just to sort of reinforce that point that we need to have a partnership with big tech, but governments need to seize back the initiative in developing smart principles-based regulation of these companies. I think they need to do that in alliance with each other. And when we look at, there are increasingly, I think, pockets of good international cooperation on standards and norms in technology. UNESCO published some very good recommendations on AI this week. We can see it beginning, and we can also see some areas in which not just democracies, but pretty much every country in the world has some common ground. I think no one wishes to see platforms used for child sexual abuse. Let's start on the things that we know we do need to control and regulate for, and work out and form alliances around, if you like, that principles-based agile regulation that protects citizens and simultaneously allows innovation to flourish. And I think, you know, there is a balance to be struck there. There clearly is. To Jim's point that we were behind the curve, and Ashok's point, we definitely were. There's another point here about tech literacy in society. data literacy in society. How over time do we build societies that understand what is being done with their data and therefore understand the value streams that they're part of and seize back some agency? And what can we do as like-minded states to build data intermediaries, to drive technologies that better protect citizens, et cetera, et cetera. And then on this question of power, I thought that was such an interesting conversation. I mean, really, ultimate power is the ability to influence and constrain individual human beings. And that has tended to be the preserve of states. And many states have chosen to exercise that responsibility with a sense of the awesome responsibility that comes with that and with great care. And I just wanted to extend the conversation sort of beyond where we are today into future technologies. So let's consider human augmentation. Human augmentation puts some of this conversation to shame. The idea that in future, people may have neural interfaces either implanted or outside their heads that can interfere with individual privacy. And if they have a right function, interfere with human agency. This requires us to be literate right now and get ahead of the curve. Because this is why that's my definition of power, is really the ability to influence and therefore, unless careful, misuse that power is the thing I think we're most worried about. I'll leave it there.
Well, thank you. But to ask you as well, when you are talking about not just the nature of power, but also the nature of values. And my question would be that not every country that you might consider a trusted friend ticks all the boxes for each of us. I mean, even between, let's say, the UK and India, we probably do not tick. The point is, do you start with the lowest common denominator approach, or do you take the high road? And you can answer that in a bit while I go to Jim, who has his hand up as well.
Yeah, and the only thing, obviously, you were going at an issue of standards, which I'll let Andrew go to. I just want to put one little dimension into this. Well, it's not a little dimension, it's an important one, because it builds on what Ashok said earlier, in that you have to look at these forces because they undermine the very democratic processes that we need to deal with major issues of our time, not the least of which are pandemic, but even more importantly, I would argue, is climate. And then when you look at the global framework for IP with IP maximalism, I think the contention over vaccine diplomacy is a small foreplay for what we're going to experience in climate technologies, where it's really going to be about winners and losers of the economic power and gain, yet everyone's supposed to share for the public good. So when you talk about the data governance, I think folks are underestimating the role of the TRIPS and TRIPS maximalism in these regional frameworks that are fundamentally about remote regulatory control by the powerful states and pushing more and more IP maximalism in that. And yet you want people to work on common problems like health with vaccines. Only climate's going to be much, much more. So as I say, I don't see an equilibrium state. And I think when you see the IP parts of it, there's just as much gaming going on there as the free flow of data issues. So I just wanted to put that in because I didn't want to run out of time and not have a chance to introduce the climate consequences of these forces. But I didn't want to jump ahead of Andrew responding to your prior question.
So Andrew, going back to you.
Well, gosh, Indrani, that's a tough one, isn't it? I mean, I'm not a moral philosopher. I'm at the edge of my ability here, and I'll try and approach this with due humility. Ethics are clearly elastic, and they clearly change over time, and their response to society's response to change and response to the environment around them. And so to an extent, we can see people's ethics being driven, and have seen them throughout history being driven by technological change. I think it's also fair to say that values are culture specific. And I think we see that. You alluded to that by saying that whilst we have much in common, In some values, there's probably difference between, say, the consensus in India and, say, the consensus in the UK. And there'll be a lot of subtlety in all of that. So I do think there is something about going back to what we consider to be universal and what we have already, as countries, signed up to in terms of the values we consider to be universal. And things like the founding charter of the United Nations become incredibly important, because let's take that human augmentation example again. You know, we already have signed up to human rights agreements of the United Nations that talk about torture, the right to privacy, and all of these things. Can you use the existing frameworks for conversation and apply them to new technologies as they come along, rather than say, we're going to reinvent everything? Because it would be probably difficult to get back to that consensus on some of those founding articles of the international system. Now, of course, there'll be some consent and evade, there'll be some difference. But I think where the free world has an advantage is that we can have this conversation openly, candidly. We can discuss it with each other. We can acknowledge difference. We can get to not perhaps the lowest common denominator, but the things that unite us. And we can consider our values with sufficient abstraction to cope with some of that cultural difference without losing the essence of what we're seeking to protect. But I think, as you can see, you probably need a philosopher in this conversation. I've done my best.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And Jim, I will take up the idea, the subject of both climate as well as vaccines. And vaccines not merely for COVID, but you know, we will be having more pandemics, and I presume we will be talking the same conversation again and again. And as you said, you know, TRIPS is not enough. A TRIPS waiver is not enough, and we have seen why it is not enough, because there is inherent in the TRIPS agreement is also a compulsory licensing clause, which is very difficult for smaller countries, for poorer countries to actually implement, because if you were talking of big tech, big pharma is just as predatory an organization as big tech. So you do find it very difficult. So the conversation for a future is, as Andrew put it, is not just on human augmentation or, you know, a technology that we can only imagine today, but it is how you look at the rules of the road. Where are the guardrails for entities that are not states? States come in inherently with their guardrails. Where are the guardrails for big tech, big pharma, especially when our challenges have become more global, even as our politics are becoming less global? So I was wondering if you would all take a shot at it. Jim.
Well, I think fundamentally it's the job of governments to regulate, not corporations, and they'll always say it's voluntary, but we saw how that worked in the financial crisis, and we saw how that's working in social media. So fundamentally, states have to govern and not corporations, and they try to make it voluntary, but I don't believe it should be. I think also you have to understand these regional agreements are happening, whether it's in North America or CETA or TPP, that are fundamentally enshrining TRIPS plus. And so we're taking this system and pushing it to an ever higher level. And then China says, oh boy, I like that system. I think I can outplay that. And they filed more patents in the last couple of years than the rest of the world combined. And they say, well, we can use state structured means rather than pure firm structured means to encircle the commons. So, you know, and I think it's beyond even the TRIPS waiver. It's moved beyond that with these TRIPS plus. And again, I state this same thing's going to happen with climate technologies, where the cheapest thing to do is burn coal unless you have technologies, but you have hoarders of the IP out there, and we have frameworks that don't focus on public good, and we have an economic system that is rivalrous, and it drives more inequality because it's leveraged returns, increasing marginal returns, as opposed to decreasing marginal returns through comparative advantage of trade. It's a different system. So I think we have to go much more to an ex-ante view of what do you have to structure in the system, rather than just trying to cope with its problems after the fact. And I think, what would intrigue me for the next couple of years is an ex-ante set of discussions, and what are the forms of global and domestic institutions that we need. We have to remember our societies were built on very brilliantly creative institutions built 100, 200 years ago that we all take as given in convention, but they were very novel at the time. When is the last time we've had proper discussions on institutions? Why shouldn't a public entity be the mediator of delivering you your news? Why shouldn't a public entity be your directory of contacts and your identity keeper? How come these have all gone into private hands? So those are the beginning of public institution, public investment questions, and how you create an ex-ante system, address these issues up ex-ante.
So, so thank you very much for that, Jim. And my question, and this is going to be my last question, and to all of you, with which you can all sort of put in your closing remarks. If you would all to put your thinking caps on today, and this is a global technology summit, and part of our jobs is to think ahead and stay ahead of the curve. If you talk about institutions and values, and what are the institutions that you would should we want to create? What is it that in this world that we are in, and in the world that we seek to be in, with the technological advances looking the way they are, what is an institute? What are the institutions that will govern us, will govern the norms and standards of this new world? I mean, to which extent? Today you are talking about, say, backdoors for telecom technology, but tomorrow you'll be talking about, controlling your mind or controlling your entire existence by an external agency. And so, if all three of you, if you could please give us a sense of the kind of institutions that we might want to start talking about. Andrew, would you like to
take that first?
Yeah, go right ahead, Ashok.
So, no, go ahead if Andrew wants to. But,
go ahead.
Ashok, I think you should go ahead. I can build it.
Thank you. That's a very broad stroke and big picture question you've asked, Indranee. I don't know if any of us has a clear answer to that, but let me have a dash at it.
But you're all in the hot seat today.
I'll go back to something which you asked Andrew about, countries, even countries that are usually like-minded, not agreeing on everything. I think, yes, if you look at the three countries represented here, India, the UK, and Canada, we will not always agree on everything. But there is a difference between agreement and trust. Systemically, we trust each other. We may not agree. Now, trust can be institutionalized. Systems can be built to advance trust. Trust can, more crudely put, also be incentivized. If we create a system whereby we have to trust each other, because it's almost like a mutual defense pact if you look at it, but in the technology sphere. If you look at something like vaccines, since that was discussed, vaccines are created and delivered as the end product of a horrifically and horribly complicated global supply chain. If one node of that chain or one link in that chain cracks or is blocked, the whole chain doesn't work. The vaccines we are making in India have ingredients coming in from about a dozen countries. Over 300 ingredients which come from other countries, including, in addition to hundreds being made in India. These chains, and of course, as technology advances and technologies we can't even imagine today, develop in the years and decades to come, these chains will have to work on a system of trust and a system of mutually assured supplies. So, if you ask me what institutions would I like to build, I'd like to build partnerships. I don't want to use the word alliances because that has another connotation, but partnerships, flexible partnerships between different countries for different technologies, but broadly countries that can work together and can trust each other. I would like to say there should be a global system which involves all countries of the world. I realize that may be a little ambitious and a little unrealistic, but partnerships of the like-minded, partnerships of the willing, as it were, that's certainly what I'd like to see happening and what I, in fact, do see happening in the years to come.
Thank you. Andrew.
Well, I mean, that was a brilliant answer, wasn't it? And I can only build on that, Ashok, and thank you. I was thinking that I couldn't, I'm afraid, say what institutions, but what would be the attributes of partnerships that we would want? I had absolutely jotted down trust-based, incentivized by really conscious effort to engineer in mutual value. And I think that's the point, which is that if the value, we've really been discussing this throughout, one way or another, if the value only flows in one direction, i.e. from south to north, or from the citizen to the monopoly, we're getting stuff wrong. So I thought key attributes would be north-south. I think that is really, really important. I was at a UK, a G7 Tech Forum last week, hosted by the UK government, where we were blessed with the presence of a number of African delegations who very coherently made the point that 50% of the globe is not connected and they need to be involved in the conversation on standards. One, they need to be connected. Two, they need to be involved in the conversation on standards. And this is not something that the North should impose on the South. So key attribute for me to generate trust and to generate mutual value must be that North-South geopolitical proposition. Like Ashok, I think that the aspiration to create a truly global system may be the right aspiration to have, but exceptionally hard to implement. But what's the next best thing? And then I thought those examples on vaccines were brilliant. I mean, you could say the same for semiconductors. You could say the same for a number of things where you have a complex value chain, a complex set of dependencies, and it's trust that's going to get you through that. But I think trust fundamentally comes from shared values, shared incentives. And that should be at the heart of our proposition internationally and the heart of what should bring broadly the free world together on these issues.
Thank you, Andrew. And Jim, you get the last word.
Well, thank you, and this has been great, and there's a lot of agreement between me and Ashok, and I agree with Andrew and Ashok so much of what they said. I've been very public for 3 years now on the call for a digital stability board. I think you can borrow from the financial stability board that came out of the financial crisis, but of course this is going to be different. I think you can build from the UN Partnership on Information and Democracy, or you could take a combination of EU, G7, Quad, Five Eyes, and say, I want to do an FSB with that group. I want to have a dual use view on this, both on, well, a tri-use, economy, society, and security. It's all going to come down to the standards and structures and how they're codified and negotiated on this, which Ashok mentioned earlier on this. So I think you have the basis to form an institution. I think you're going to have to build codification systems and research and best practices. I know the US and UK talked about cooperation earlier this week on competition. These are very vexatious issues. So you might as well get like-minded folks who share the liberal values, who share security concerns, and who want shared prosperity, and then let others come into it, very much like prior institutions were born. So I actually think you have the pieces to put them into place beginning in early 22, and perhaps organizations and conferences like this and the Carnegie Institution globally with its new leadership, that's the kind of thing where we can address this thing. So I'm optimistic, and I think there is the seeds of something that can be strung together in the near term based on the early movements, but it's technical. So you actually have to start stitching the pieces together and move beyond, you know, the general things we share. Okay, how do you reduce it? I'll just say, it's like people say we want safe children. Okay, that's speed limits, that's crossing walks, that's enforcement, that's lighting system, that's blood health. You actually said, I value safety, and then you put in a whole set of codification systems to manifest that. And they iterated, and it's very much the same on this. And we just have to get down to business in a formal way sooner rather than later.
Thank you very much, all of you. And it was fascinating listening to you and fascinating hearing you think aloud about challenges and that we will face, we may not even be facing today. But I think the key takeaway from all of you has been the importance of values, the importance of shared values, and the importance of trust. And I would say that if nothing else, the pandemic has shown us all the importance of shared values and shared trust. So these are good sort of foundations to build our next generation institutions. Thank you all for being here today. Thank you for those fabulous remarks. And thank you, Carnegie, for hosting such a wonderful summit. Good morning, good evening, and have a great day.
Thank you. Thank you, Indrani. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you.